When Lisa called the ambulance for her young toddler Ethan, she was sick with worry. He had never shown these symptoms before, saying he was in pain. She saw him blinking in and out of consciousness, and as he mumbled 3 words before fainting, Lisa couldn't help herself in her panic. She interpreted the words in the only way she knew how. As she held the hand of her passed-out child in the ambulance, she again dialed 911. Though this time, not for an ambulance, but to call the police on her husband. Though scared by the sight of her unwell toddler, Lisa was happy to be home. Working 3 days a week until Ethan started preschool was the best decision she and her husband, Marcus, had ever made. It was why Lisa had reacted so quickly when Ethan started to behave oddly, and she would later be glad for it. Marcus had only left home maybe 15 minutes before, as it was still early in the morning. Hell, she had just kissed him on the cheek and waved him off without a clue what turmoil would happen in their household only half an hour later. It had come out of the blue completely, as Ethan had just been playing with his toys. Lisa had been cleaning the kitchen, as she now had some spare time after having finished breakfast. She could hear it then, the labored breathing coming from one room away. She had slowly put down her cleaning supplies, one of her eyebrows raising in question. "Ethan, honey, what are you doing?" Yet, she didn't get back an answer. "Ethan?" Lisa said, now a bit more alarmed, as her sweet toddler always answered her, even if it was with just a few words. She immediately dropped the things she held and jogged to the other room, only to see Ethan doubled over with labored breathing. Panic flared inside her. What was wrong with her son? "Ethan, talk to me. What's going on?" Lisa asked, crouching down on the ground and checking her kid. "I'm hurting, Mommy," he said in between breaths. Had he swallowed a toy? She couldn't be sure, as she immediately put him in the Heimlich maneuver. When that didn't seem to work, aside from a few grunts from Ethan, panic started to settle in. She turned him around to face her, as she saw his eyelids droop. She immediately grabbed her phone and dialed 911. This simply couldn't be happening. She didn't understand what happened, but knew she had to find out quickly. Luckily, a dispatcher answered quickly. "I need your help. There is something wrong with my child. He has trouble breathing." Lisa was quick to give her address and told her of the possibly failed Heimlich maneuver she had performed. But then she saw Ethan blink in and out of consciousness. In her panic, the dispatcher's voice drowned out. She tried shaking him awake, which worked, and she couldn't help but feel relief. She had to find out what was going on. "Ethan, honey, stay with me. What is wrong? Where does it hurt? Please tell me." Lisa pleaded with her son, and the words seemed to register. Ethan then said 3 words that shook her to her core. She wanted to ask him more, but he was out like a light. She tried waking him again, but this time it was to no avail. She had to come to terms with what this might mean. She checked if he was still breathing, and though ragged, she could still feel his rhythmic inhalation and exhalation. This gave her some relief, as he was still well. She immediately grabbed the phone again. "He's lost consciousness, but is still breathing. When is the ambulance arriving?" As soon as she asked the question, Lisa heard a loud knock on the front door. She immediately hung up the phone, picked up Ethan, and ran to the door. She opened it with an almost inhuman speed and came face to face with the ambulance workers. Their eyes immediately went to the passed-out toddler and rushed past Lisa. They had to find out what was wrong with Ethan, and they had to do it fast. As the ambulance workers hurried around, Lisa stood frozen in the living room, her mind racing. The 3 words Ethan had whispered were a jigsaw puzzle with missing pieces. Could Marcus be involved? No, it seemed impossible. Yet doubt gnawed at her, making her stomach churn. She watched the workers lift Ethan carefully, their faces a mix of professionalism and concern, mirroring the storm of emotions inside her. "They need to take him, ma'am," one worker said gently, breaking through her torrent of thoughts. Lisa nodded, her feet moving before her mind did, following them out. The morning air felt unnaturally cold as she climbed into the ambulance, the world outside blurring into a background of her fears. Ethan, so small on the stretcher, was a sight that tightened her throat. Wrapped in the sterile scent of the ambulance, Lisa watched the medics work over Ethan, their voices calm but urgent. The decision to call the police on Marcus echoed in her mind. Was she overreacting? Guilt and fear tangled within her, but the image of Ethan's pale face was a stark reminder. She had to trust her instincts. Ethan's safety was her only priority. With every mile the ambulance covered, Lisa's resolve hardened. Ethan's whispered words were a cry for help, one she couldn't ignore. As the city lights streaked by, she made silent promises to her unconscious son. She would protect him, no matter the cost or consequence. The love for her child was unyielding, and she would protect him from anything or anyone. Sitting beside Ethan, Lisa's mind was singularly focused. Her earlier indecision faded away, replaced by a protective urgency that sharpened her thoughts. She would do everything, anything, to ensure Ethan's safety. The uncertainty of what lay ahead loomed large, but Lisa's determination was unyielding. She knew what she had to do as she grabbed her phone with shaking hands. Lisa's fingers trembled as she dialed 911, her voice firm but filled with an emotion she couldn't quite name. "I need to report. I think my husband, Marcus, he might have endangered our son." The words felt surreal as they tumbled out, mixed with fear, betrayal, and an unwavering resolve to protect Ethan. Her heart raced, every beat echoing her decision's gravity. As the dispatcher prompted for details, Lisa's mind raced through the past few hours. "It's just, Ethan mentioned something. Right before She hesitated, the memory of Ethan's faint voice a painful spear through her heart. "I can't shake off the feeling that Marcus is involved somehow." Her suspicions, once shadows in her mind, now took form in her words. The dispatcher's voice was a beacon of hope in the darkness. "We're taking your accusations very seriously, ma'am. Officers are on their way to speak with Marcus now." Lisa felt a momentary relief, a sliver of hope amidst the chaos. The promise of immediate action offered a semblance of control, a step towards safeguarding Ethan from any harm that might have been lurking in their own home. After the call, Lisa sat in silent contemplation, the ambulance's steady hum a backdrop to her sporadic thoughts. Accusing Marcus, the man she loved, was like tearing a piece of her own heart out. But Ethan's vulnerable state and those three haunting words left her no choice. The weight of her accusations pressed down on her, a burden she accepted for Ethan's sake. Once a mumbled mystery, Ethan's words now resounded in Lisa's mind with clarity. They were a dire warning, a piece of a puzzle she was still putting together. A resolve steeled within her as she watched the city lights pass by through the ambulance window. She would decipher, nay, uncover, what his words truly meant and confront Marcus for what he had done to their son. In the dim light of the ambulance, Lisa's mind replayed the moment when Ethan spoke those three words. His voice, so small and frail, seemed to echo against the walls of her heart. She could almost feel the warmth of his breath as he whispered, a contrast to the cold fear that now gripped her. but not as much as the sudden sound coming from the monitors. As the ambulance sped through the streets, Ethan's condition worsened as the monitors started to beep frantically. Watching the medics fight to stabilize him, she felt a storm of emotions raging within her. Despair, anger, and a profound helplessness washed over her in waves. Would Ethan even survive this whole ordeal? Amid the chaos, a doubt crept into Lisa's mind. Maybe this all had been an honest mistake. Had she been too quick to blame Marcus? The question gnawed at her, but the sight of Ethan, so vulnerable and in distress, reaffirmed her suspicions. She couldn't shake off the feeling that Marcus was somehow responsible, and she would make sure that he would pay the price. With each passing minute, Lisa's anticipation grew. What would the police find? What would they do to Marcus? Her mind was full of worry and conjecture, imagining every possible outcome. The uncertainty was excruciating, but she clung to the hope that the police intervention would bring clarity and justice for Ethan. Her thoughts were a blend of fear and an eager longing for answers. Lisa steeled herself for what was to come as the hospital loomed ahead. She knew the road ahead would be fraught with legal battles and tough decisions, but she was ready. Ready to face Marcus. Ready to fight for Ethan's sake. She was a mother, a protector, and she would do whatever it took to shield her son from harm, even if that meant banning his father from his life. The moment the ambulance doors flew open, it was like a starting gun went off. Ethan was scooped up and rushed into the ER so fast that Lisa barely kept up. Her heart was doing somersaults in her chest, each step echoing a mix of dread and hope. Watching her little guy get carried away by a swarm of doctors and nurses? Yeah, that increased the urgency to a whole new level. Lisa was there the whole time, right by Ethan's side, holding onto his tiny hand like it was the only thing keeping her grounded, whispering to him all those "I love yous" and "hang in there's," hoping he'd somehow catch every word. This was her post, her vigil, standing guard in a sea of white coats and beeping machines, a quiet force in the eye of the storm. Whenever there was a quiet moment, those three little words Ethan had whispered just kept bouncing around in Lisa's head. What was he trying to say? It felt like trying to solve a mystery without all the clues, each guess heavier and scarier than the last. Those words, meant to be a whisper, felt like they were shouting at her, keeping her mind racing with what-ifs, especially when Ethan wouldn't wake up. Waiting for any news on Ethan felt like time had decided to simply slow down. With every tick of the clock and every footstep coming her way, Lisa's heart would skip, hoping for some news, good or bad. This whole waiting game was torture, like being stuck on a roller coaster that's all climb and no drop. It was a weird mix of hoping to hear something and dreading it simultaneously. Lisa's determination to keep Ethan safe through all the chaos got stronger. She was like a one-woman army, standing firm against whatever came their way. This hospital, with all its sounds and secrets, turned into her battlefield, and she was ready to take on the world for her son, even her husband, who would soon be apprehended by the cops. Marcus was at work, just a regular day filled with emails and coffee breaks when the cops showed up. It was like a scene from a movie, only he was the unsuspecting star. There he was, surrounded by police in the middle of the office, everyone's eyes on him. Confused and a bit embarrassed, he couldn't for the life of him figure out what was going on. When the cops laid it out for him, accusations flying left and right, Marcus felt like he'd been punched in the gut. Being accused of putting his own kid in danger? That was a nightmare he hadn't seen coming. Trying to wrap his head around what they were saying, he was lost in a fog of disbelief. How did things get so twisted? Wait, Ethan's hurt? What happened to him? Marcus's questions poured out in a frantic rush. The panic was setting in, tightening around his chest like a vice. All thoughts of defending himself fell away, replaced by a tidal wave of worry for his son. He needed answers now, but the cops weren't giving up much. Only glances were exchanged over his head. Next thing Marcus knew, he was in handcuffs. The cold metal a stark reminder of how quickly life can flip upside down. This had to be a mistake, a bad dream he'd wake up from. But the click of the handcuffs and the stern faces around him said otherwise. The ride to the station was a blur, his mind racing to make sense of the chaos. Sitting in that stark, too bright interrogation room, Marcus was desperate for any piece of information about Ethan. His world had shrunk to this moment, this crisis. Every minute dragged, each second a demand for answers he wasn't getting. What happened to his family? How did a regular Tuesday turn into the worst day of his life? When Marcus finally got the lowdown on Ethan's condition, it hit him like a truck. Sitting there, hearing how bad things were, he felt a mix of fear and guilt churn inside him. This was his kid, his little buddy, fighting through something huge, and he was stuck here, unable to do anything. It was a tough pill to swallow, leaving him feeling helpless and desperate. "Please, I need to see him. I'll do whatever you ask," Marcus begged the officers. His voice cracked, every word heavy with urgency. Seeing Ethan and being there for him became the single most important thing. Promises of cooperation tumbled out. A father's pledge to move mountains, cross oceans, anything, if it meant he could be by his son's side through this. For Marcus, nothing else mattered now but Ethan. All the confusion and accusations faded into the background. His mind, heart, and soul were focused on getting to Ethan, holding his hand, and whispering that everything would be okay. This paternal pull, this instinct to protect and comfort his son, drove every thought, every breath. Marcus was ready to agree to anything and sign whatever they wanted just to get that chance to be with Ethan. "Name your conditions," he said, determination etching his features. The need to be there, to offer whatever comfort he could, overshadowed everything else. It was a moment of pure, unconditional love, ready to face any hurdle, any bureaucracy to reach his son. The officers watching Marcus began to see the raw, unfiltered concern etched on his face. It was clear this wasn't an act. The guy was genuinely distressed. He was clearly worried sick about his son. Observing his reactions and pleas, it was hard not to feel a tug at the heartstrings. Here was a dad caught up in a nightmare scenario, showing the kind of worry and love that only a parent could know. As Marcus went to the hospital, his mind was a battleground of fear and worry for Ethan. Every possible worst-case scenario played out in his head, each more terrifying than the last. He tried to brace himself for whatever was coming, but the thought of seeing Ethan hurt was like a punch to the gut, especially since everyone believed it was his fault. During the drive, Marcus couldn't help but replay every decision he'd ever made concerning Ethan. Had he been too careless? Too strict? The doubt was gnawing at him, making him question his every move. This self-reflection was brutal, a deep dive into the what-ifs and if-onlys that haunt a parent in crisis. The moment Marcus stepped into the hospital, the air felt charged, heavy with tension. It was like walking into a storm, the pressure building with each step. He knew what was waiting for him wasn't going to be easy. The anticipation was palpable, a thick cloud of unease that settled around him as he navigated the corridors. each turn bringing him closer to Ethan and to facing Lisa. Lisa was standing there, listening intently as the doctors shared Ethan's current state, stable but unconscious. Her face was a mask of worry and relief, a confusing mix that made Marcus's heart sink even further. Hearing the words and seeing the reality of the situation laid bare was a moment of harsh truth. Ethan was fighting, but wasn't out of the woods yet. Not by a long shot. Marcus's presence in the room was like a spark to a powder keg. The unresolved tension between him and Lisa was palpable. A silent storm brewing beneath the surface. His arrival was a reminder of the accusations, the fears, and the questions that had yet to be answered. It was a confrontation waiting to happen. A stark reminder of the fractures within what was once a happy family. Right when Marcus stepped into Ethan's room, it was like walking into a hurricane of Lisa's anger. She was all glares and tight lips, practically staring daggers his way. Marcus, caught off guard, felt like he'd just accidentally crashed a party where he was the least wanted guest. The air was so thick with tension that you could cut it with a knife. Lisa launched into accusations like she was firing from a machine gun. "How could you?" she blasted, each word loaded with anger and a pinch of shock. Marcus, totally lost at sea, stumbled over his words, trying to navigate through the sudden storm. He was like a deer in headlights, only the car was Lisa's rapid-fire questioning, and he had nowhere to run. "Daddy said secret, Lisa yelled. "How could you let him keep a secret if it can endanger his safety? What have you done to him?" Marcus's face went from confused to full-on shock mode. Those words, coming straight from Ethan, turned their world upside down, painting a surreal picture that Marcus couldn't recognize. He had never meant for it to go this far. The room turned into a soap opera scene real quick, with Marcus and Lisa throwing emotions around like confetti. Marcus tried to defend his corner, while Lisa wasn't having any of it. The whole conversation was a roller coaster, with ups, downs, and loop-the-loops of misunderstandings. It was like they were both speaking another language, as there was no mutual understanding in sight. In the middle of their verbal tug-of-war, a soft murmur from Ethan's bed hit the pause button on their drama. They both froze, turning to see Ethan blinking awake, a silent truce falling over the room. This tiny moment of calm in the eye of their storm offered a breather, a gentle nudge reminding them what the fuss was all about. Ethan's bleary-eyed look of confusion was like a timeout in the middle of a boxing match. With one puzzled glance around the room, he sliced through the tension. Marcus and Lisa, caught up in their own storm, suddenly felt the atmosphere shift. It was as if Ethan had unknowingly played mediator, his bewilderment acting as a silent plea for peace. Once divided by anger and accusations, the room found a temporary bridge in Ethan's confusion. "Ethan, buddy, you okay?" Marcus ventured, trying to bridge the gap with warmth. Ethan, still groggy and squinting at both his parents, couldn't hide his confusion. "Why are you mad?" he asked, his voice small and shaky. It was a question loaded with innocence, pointing right at the heart of the matter without even knowing it. Ethan's innocent bewilderment shone a stark light on the whole mess. Here was their little guy, not understanding why his room had suddenly turned into a battlefield. His simple questions and his puzzled look were a reality check for both Marcus and Lisa. It was a reminder that, at the center of their turmoil, was a child who needed them to be his safe harbor, not the storm. "Are you mad at me, Daddy? I kept your secret, I promise," Ethan said, as his parents stayed quiet after his first question. The sudden shift in perspective forced Marcus and Lisa to take a step back. Seeing Ethan so lost, They couldn't help but question how things had escalated to this point. They were, after all, here for Ethan. And that was what truly mattered. Marcus was completely lost. Why would Ethan think I'd be mad at him? He wondered aloud, racking his brain. The look on Ethan's face, that mix of worry and innocence, just didn't add up. It was like trying to solve a puzzle with half the pieces missing. Marcus knew he wasn't the shouty type, so Ethan's fear stumped him. However, before he could talk to Ethan about it, the door behind him opened with the person holding all the answers. It was the doctor. He immediately demanded attention from the room as everyone turned around to face him. With a calm yet serious tone, the doctor laid it all out. Ethan had a severe allergic reaction to peanuts, he explained. The room went quiet, the weight of those words sinking in. Lisa and Marcus exchanged a glance, the reality of the situation dawning on them, a mixture of relief and dread filling the air. The moment the doctor mentioned peanuts, Marcus's heart sank. The memory of that secret snack, a little peanut butter cup treat he'd given Ethan that morning, came crashing back. "It was me," he whispered, barely audible, the guilt washing over him like a tidal wave. It was an epiphany wrapped in a nightmare, the cause of Ethan's condition tracing back to a father's unwitting mistake. As the gravity of Ethan's situation and its resolution settled in, the room was filled with an emotional cocktail. Lisa and Marcus, holding Ethan's hands, let out tears of relief. They were tears that spoke volumes, relief that Ethan was okay, sorrow for the scare they'd been through, and a sense of guilt for the chaos that ensued. It was a moment of vulnerability, a family united by their ordeal. Marcus couldn't shake the image of Ethan smiling earlier that day as he accepted the secret snack. The guilt was overwhelming, eating at him as he replayed the morning's events. "I should have known better," he thought, the weight of his mistake heavy on his shoulders. It was a harsh lesson learned. The memory of that morning was now a stark reminder of the consequences of a seemingly small act. Marcus sat by Ethan's bed, taking his son's hand gently before turning to his wife. "Honey, I am so sorry. I had asked Ethan to keep the snack I had given him this morning. A secret," he started, his voice tinged with regret. "I had taken one out of the cupboard for myself, and Ethan had caught me. It was supposed to be our little secret, something special between us." His eyes met Lisa's, seeking not just her attention, but also her understanding. "I never thought it would end up like this," he finished, the guilt evident in his expression. Lisa, listening closely, sighed deeply, and her initial anger softened. "I know you didn't mean for any of this to happen, Marcus." She moved closer, her hand finding Marcus's. "We all make mistakes," she said, offering a tired but genuine smile. Looking from one parent to the other, Ethan added in his weak but earnest voice, "It's okay, Daddy. I still like the secret." "There's something we all should take away from this," Marcus said after a moment, his voice steadier. "No more secret snacks without checking," Lisa answered with a playful smile on her lips, trying to lighten the gravity of their lesson. It was a tough lesson that would stick with them forever, shaping their actions and decisions moving forward. Through the turmoil, their family bond had been tested, but emerged stronger. They had faced fear, guilt, and forgiveness, each emotion weaving them closer together. Now, sitting beside Ethan's bed, they were a united front, ready to tackle whatever came their way. This ordeal reinforced their love, proving that together they could weather any storm or misunderstanding with patience and love. Leaving the hospital, the family felt a mix of relief and gratitude. The sun seemed brighter, the world a bit kinder as they headed home, their steps lighter. With Ethan between them, their hands linked, they were walking away from a scary chapter and toward a future filled with promise and understanding. It was a new beginning, a second chance to cherish every moment, every little secret, with wisdom and love.